I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times. Financial resilience, often talked about as a matter of income, how much you earn, how much you save. But what if it's actually something else entirely? With recent data revealing that most households are planning no further than 12 months out, is this just a trauma response to economic volatility, or are we witnessing a permanent shift in how we define a long-term future? Welcome to Money Hacks. I'm Howie Lim. Today we're joined by David Broom, Chief Client and Distribution Officer at Sun Life Asia, to tackle the uncomfortable question: in a world of rising costs, is Singapore's reputation as a safe haven creating a false sense of security for our own bank accounts? Welcome to the show, David.
Howie, it's a pleasure to be here.
I want to start with the resilience gap, though. If 61% of households are struggling to cope beyond 6 months after a loss of income, let's say, why is that 6-month window sort of the breaking point for modern financial stability, and is it becoming harder to defend?
So, Howie, it's a great question. And as the Sun Life Financial Resilience Index has shown, 61% of households, as you mentioned, are struggling to cope beyond that 6-month mark. Also, 81% have said that inflation has made it harder to cover monthly expenses. Now, that 6-month mark is pretty much an industry standard. It's a kind of a checkpoint to which we look at to see how financial resilient are people. But the reality is that that number is actually also quite low. Many people have differing kind of points to how long that they would need to survive should something unfortunate happen, whether they lose their jobs, whether they get an unforeseen illness, or whether, in the worst case scenario, there is a death for themselves or within the family. But the question to ask yourself is, how long could you continue to live the lifestyle that you have should one of those unfortunate events come up? So 6 months is that industry benchmark, and we're not doing very well on that. But actually, it could also be that you need longer. And that, of course, would depend on the nature of the unforeseen circumstance that comes up. The question that many Singaporeans can ask themselves is, how long do you think it would take for you to get a job of equal value should you lose your job today? And is 6 months enough? Or maybe you need a year. But 6 months as an indicator is showing a concerning trend that people are not thinking long-term enough and building that long-term financial resilience.
You think they're redefining what long-term means? Because you're saying that many households aren't planning further beyond a year. So we're seeing that shift in how they define long-term, right? Is this maybe just temporary, a defensive reaction to what's happening right now, the current economic volatility, or is it a permanent shift?
Howie, 55% of Singaporeans have said managing their day-to-day expenses is their top priority. Of course, in times where we do see rising inflation and increasing cost pressures, this number will usually increase because people do take a short-term response to short-term pressures. That said, only 53% have got a plan or only plan up to 1 year ahead. And those numbers haven't really been significantly different year on year. A disconnect between the belief and the understanding and education that sits in Singapore of what's required versus the actions that one could take to protect themselves for the future and really build long-term financial resilience. So whilst there is no doubt at all that current inflationary pressures and costs of living is causing some people to act in a certain way on a short-term reactive basis, there is also the longer-term need to really help take what is a strong financial understanding and build that into active planning and future-proofing oneself in Singapore.
Okay, maybe we talk about financial literacy then, but maybe it's a case of financial confidence has been shaken a bit. The crisis is in confidence. How do we fix confidence issues rather than, oh, you can save more, you can spend less, and that doesn't always work.
Absolutely. The single most consistent differentiator is having a financial plan and sticking to it. It's not necessarily sticking to one plan, though. It's sticking to the process. Because it's an interesting thing where there are some people who have in the past created a financial plan. The reality is it's not a one and done approach. Having that diligence to re-review how your financial plan is going as external factors kick in. That is really what's required here. So in Singapore, what we've found is that people are 3 times more likely and more confident in achieving their goals when they've actually got a long-term plan. It was 60% of respondents with a long-term plan feel more financially resilient than 17% that don't. Then
When you
taking
say
that
long term, though, David, what are we talking about? A 10-year plan, 5-year maybe?
absolutely spot on. I think many people they will have their own assessment of what they feel long term is. For me, and being in the industry for quite some time and taking a long term view as insurance companies need to, it is anywhere upwards of a 5 to 10 year period. So short term, most people are thinking 6 to 12 months. Medium term, it's a year to 5 years. Long term is that 5 to 10 year type horizon. Now, of course, the closer you get to retirement age, sometimes that can expand further. For myself, for example, I'm 46 years old. I'm still a few years away from retirement, but I am actually starting to actively consider what would my life look like at retirement age, taking the standard of a 65-year-old retirement age. Now, with that, that changes where do I invest, what my risk tolerance is, where I might want to live when I'm older, and how might I want to build future wealth for when I retire rather than what I'm looking for today.
So people are confusing resilience and income because you're saying it should be about preparedness as well and having that plan. So what do you think is perhaps the single most consistent non-monetary habit that separates a resilient household from one that's just stuck in survival mode?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is people getting a better understanding and building their financial literacy. In 2025, approximately 17% of the people that we surveyed said that they used AI to self inform on financial needs, what their requirements are, to help build financial literacy. In 2026, that number has jumped to 53%. That is a huge societal shift. Singaporeans are very aware of the fact that there are financial pressures and there are self-starting and have a kind of a desire to learn more, to educate themselves. So that's the first step. The second step for me would be there is only so much as a non professional we can educate ourselves on. So, seeking professional and financial advice is key. Now, in Singapore, only 21% of the respondents have actually sought professional financial advice as part of improving their finances. Now, again, that's a big gap. There are a lot of people out there that could go and seek professional advice to build not only their own knowledge, but also to create an effective plan. Because it is one thing to build literacy, it's another thing to take that into action with a clear plan that really helps to build the right practices, the right behaviors, the right long term approach that will help make people more resilient and secure.
David, what's the first sacrifice that people make in what the survey found that is a very dangerous choice when it comes to
Mm.
long-term financial health? I'm a guess, insurance.
Well, actually, interestingly, the number one for Singapore has been 24% of people draw down on their savings. That is a really, really concerning fact because what that basically indicates is that instead of people taking a view of how is the world changing, what my budget used to be, and how is it affected today, actually what people predominantly do is continue to not make adjustments to lifestyle or spend behaviors or expenditure and instead continue to draw down on savings that they've worked very hard to create that financial savings buffer. The second thing gets into, yeah, as you've mentioned, there's a reduction in retirement savings and we see a reduction on protection type products as well. That is again a concern because that's taking a short-term approach where not only are you not looking to ensure that your long-term future in retirement is secure, but also actually now you're exposing yourself to even greater risk by not having protection products. Unfortunately, if something else happens, what you then see is a much bigger impact to actual financial well-being. The last thing that we've seen is people have started to skip spending on essential shopping. Now, that again is a concern, and that's where You're really re-looking at what your plan is, what your budget is, what are you giving up versus what do you need to keep. That planning process will really help a long-term view rather than a short-term tweak that might be long-term detrimental.
We're going to need some tips on what to do next, David, in a moment. We're speaking with David Broom, who is part of Sun Life Asia. They did a recent survey that showed some really disturbing stats, so we'll get more into it in just a bit. Stay with us.
Market Focus Weekly, now hosted by Howie Lim. A sharp weekly deep dive into what's moving markets in Singapore and across the region. With analysts and market insiders to break down the forces shaping the week ahead. New episodes every Friday, powered by the journalism of the Business Times. Find Market Focus Weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
Welcome back. David, if Singapore is often viewed as safe haven, do you think this reputation's created sort of a false sense of security for us, or local households, that is, and it might be actually eroding individual financial resilience? I'm all right, I'm okay, I can spend what I want,
It's a great question. And the one thing that I have to say is that Singapore is a very well-run country with a lot of wonderful benefits that are provided by the government, with some really big advantages and securities of living there. But it's not immune. We now have 20% of households who are in that low resilience segment. And that's higher than other markets. It's higher than what we've seen in Indonesia. It's higher than what we've seen in Vietnam. It's almost double, actually, both of those markets. So I don't feel that there is an issue with people self-identifying the problem. I think many in Singapore are aware that they may have lower resilience. The big thing is around what can you do to make an action, to take a different approach, to take that knowledge into a behavior change. And that's where we're seeing the gap in Singapore. That said, the positive news in Singapore, those people who have taken the time to create the long-term plan are 3 times more likely to feel confident about achieving their goals, and they have far more confidence, 53% versus 18%, in being able to handle shocks versus those people who don't have a plan. So the Singaporeans who are taking the time to create a plan, they are much more positive, they are much more resilient. We see that their behaviors are giving themselves a lot more longer term, better financial outlooks.
Compared to other parts of Asia, our financial resilience is sort of better, but it's not really apples to apples or oranges to oranges, because maybe it's a different systemic structure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not apples to apples. Culture comes into play as well. In some instances, Singaporeans can be a little harsher on themselves than positivity of other markets that I've seen. So yes, it does change from market to market. But overall, there has been a big decline in Singapore versus some of the other markets. So in the past, where Singapore was one of the most resilient, the drop has been significantly higher than what we've seen in other markets. So the positive is that the awareness is there. People feel that they're not as financially resilient as they were before. The next step is really making sure they take the time to create that plan, to readjust, to focus on the future, and to do what they can to keep their savings buffer either intact or to be building on it. So it's more about taking insight into action. I think that's the bigger learning for Singaporeans today.
If someone really isn't prepared or resilient and wants to take the first step, what would that be?
Great question. Start small. Taking that first step is often the hardest step to take. But if you start small, and by starting small, for the 53% who are using AI to help themselves, that's a great first step. For the other 47%, why not start there? Take 15 minutes to go online to start educating yourself around financial literacy, financial resilience, what you could do differently to better plan, to better budget. And actually, it's 15 to 30 minutes. It's all it will take to take that first small step. From there, it's about being consistent. Set a small time in the diary, whether it be once a month or once every 2 months, to have a conversation with your family. Where are you today? How have things changed? What are your spend behaviors? What are your expenses? Have you had a fortunate change? It may well be that actually you've come into some new income one way or another. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to spend to the new income. maybe that gives you a great opportunity to rethink through what you put aside. Where do you invest? What might you put into a savings or a retirement plan? And then last but not least, planning is the consistent theme. Create a plan, even if it's basic. Now, you could do that by yourself, and there are a lot of online tools, or you can build a more comprehensive plan by speaking to a financial advisor. I do feel, however, that people taking the time to create the plan, start small, be consistent, create the plan. If you can do those three things, you will find your financial resilience quickly improving.
But you know what they say about the best laid plans and what happens to them, right? And then we're also seeing a trend toward this short-term decision making. That's not really a wise response, right, to the current volatility, is it, David?
No, absolutely right. And best laid plans, as you said, some of them you have to reevaluate. You can make the plan but not act. Sometimes the plan is wrong. You need to pivot. I think planning, action, review, and replanning is the way to go. Everyone will have a different time frame and a different frequency of the way in which they would like to do that. But for me and my family, we do it once a quarter. Others may want to do it once a month or once every 2 months. It's everybody's individual choice. But start with something. Not doing anything at all, that is actually the biggest barrier to building financial resilience.
But we don't all run our families like Broom Incorporated, David. And based on your index, is there maybe also an indicator that we can look out for, an early warning sign in the next 12 months, maybe, to make sure that our financial household health is actually improving rather than declining?
Yeah, absolutely. So the index has shown 37% of families are experiencing financial stress weekly. And whilst I don't expect anybody to run Broom Industries like I do at home, I do say that if you're feeling that financial stress, taking the time to have an open conversation with the family, which I do know can sometimes be a taboo topic and it isn't always easy, but try to take the time to have an open, engaged conversations with your loved ones, at least help you start to take that first step towards awareness and also acknowledgement of the issue. The other thing that always acts as a warning sign, if you start to see your savings buffer, no matter how large or how small that is, start to decline, that is your first warning sign that actually maybe it is time to take a look at your expenditure and replan or rebudget. Many people kind of dip in and they hope that they can weather the storm, but none of us can see the future. We can prepare as best as possible by seeing the early warning signs that I am spending above my means, that I'm no longer saving, and then see what I can readjust to get back to the right behaviors. That is something that's within my control. What's not within my control is where will the world be 9 months from now. But I suggest to everybody, if you're seeing a dip into your savings buffer, that is the first early warning signal that actually maybe it's time to replan, rebudget, and sit with your family and have at least an initial conversation on what you might be able to do slightly differently.
David, I wish we had more time. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Howie, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
David Broom, Chief Client and Distribution Officer at Sun Life Asia. This has been Money Hacks by the Business Times. I'm Howie Lim.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.